Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light. And what you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. And are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. Matthew 10, verses 27 through 29. The Sparrow is a 1996 science fiction novel written by Mary Doria Russell. It takes its name from this Bible verse. In the Christian worldview, nothing happens in either heaven or earth without God's knowledge. Even the seemingly innocuous action of a sparrow falling to the ground. Ostensibly, this is a story about Earth's first contact with alien life, but it is far more than that. This is a science fiction novel that explores themes surrounding spiritualism, religion, faith, as well as the idea that evil actions can and often are initially undertaken with benign or even benevolent intentions. Sometimes a well-meaning purpose may lead to unexpected or even devastating results. And most of the time, when events like this occur, upon reviewing the facts of the case, it turns out that it could have been easily avoidable had more caution and thought been employed. The opening lines of the book sums this up perfectly. It was predictable, in hindsight. The Jesuit scientists went to learn, not proselytize. They went so that they might come to know and love God's other children. They went for the reason Jesuits have always gone to the farthest frontiers of human exploration. They went ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. They meant no harm. The Sparrow is one of the most disturbing books that I've read in recent memory for its depiction of the desecration of both spirit and body. If you have not read The Sparrow and spoilers is something that you care about, then you might want to stop this video soon. The twist in this book turned my stomach. It made me jittery and anxious, as it was truly one of the most uncomfortable and disturbing sections of a book that I've read in a long time. If you like these kinds of stories, philosophical, slow science fiction stories that take their time releasing their secrets, and if you like unveiling the mysteries and horrors for yourself, then use the Amazon affiliate link in the description and get this book first. But if you don't mind spoilers, then continue forward. Hi guys, it's Quinn here. If you appreciate my content, consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. The book follows a mission led by the Society of Jesuits to an alien world called Rahkat. On Earth, they had identified a signal. It was a signal unlike any other, for it had undeniably been sent by intelligent life. It was music, specifically singing, the voices of extraterrestrials. We can assume they have some kind of atmosphere that propagates sound waves, George said, but not necessarily anything we could breathe. So they've got something like lungs and mouths, and they can control expelled air or whatever it is they breathe, Anne listed. And they can hear, or there'd be no point to singing, right? Said Jimmy. The language doesn't sound tonal to me, Emilio said, but it's difficult to tell when people are singing. There is a sentence structure, there are consonants and vowels, and something in the throat, like glottal stops. It didn't occur to him to wonder if they had throats. the signal had originated somewhere from the vicinity of Alpha Centauri. It was picked up by the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence program at the Arecibo Observatory. The main character that we follow in this story is the Jesuit priest, Emilio Sandoz. The story opens up in December 2059 from the perspective of Earth. It has been about 30 years since the original mission left for the planet of Rahkat. Emilio Sandoz is the only survivor. But he is not as he was. Due to the effects of relativity, Emilio is a lot younger than he would have been had he stayed on Earth. And yet his mind and body are in a state of extreme decline. As the book goes on, the story is unveiled in chunks, while jumping back and forth between the present and before and during the mission to Rahkat. Jimmy Quinn, Sophia Mendez, Anne, Mark Robichaud, and D.W. Yarbrough would also join Emilio on this church-funded mission to the alien world. We eventually learn that on the world of Rahkat, that the travelers encountered two distinct races of beings, the Runa and the Jana Ata. The Runa were the first of them to be encountered. The Runa were a gentle and harmonious species inhabiting the planet Rahkat. They lived a simple agrarian life and are characterized by their strong sense of community and cooperation. The Runa are depicted as humanoid, with fur covering their bodies and prehensile tails. They seem to have a close spiritual connection to their environment and live in balance with nature. The humans live among the Runa for some time and realize that they could not possibly have been the beings who sent the signal into outer space. The humans forge robust connections, particularly with the Runa known as Askama. But as the humans attempt to establish contact and understanding with the alien species, misunderstandings and cultural clashes do occur. In their efforts to communicate and coexist with the Runa on the planet Rahkat, the humans introduce various elements of Earth's culture, technology, and knowledge. The linguists among the crew, including Emilio Sandoz, make an attempt to teach the Runa language, and this eventually leads to a unique form of communication between the two species. Likely the most significant aspect of this is the unintentional consequences of the introduction of Earth's agricultural methods. The humans share their knowledge of farming, introducing new crops and cultivation techniques to the Runa. While this initially seems like a positive exchange, it sets off a chain of events that dramatically alters the Runa's way of life. The cultural impact also becomes profound, and there is a shift in the Runa's traditional social structure and beliefs. And most importantly, as the Runa adopts more of the human practices and technologies, the balance between the Jana Ata and the Runa is affected. As I said, the humans learned early on that the Runa could not possibly be the alien beings who produced the signal containing the recorded music. They would eventually learn that this was in fact the Jana Ata. The Jana Ata and the Runa are similar in appearance, except for the fact that the Jana Ata are larger and have sharper teeth and sharp claws. The Jana Ata have a complex social structure and exploit the Runa for their labor, treating them as a subordinate class. The Jana Ata were the Runa's primary trading counterparts. They were a far more sophisticated species, as well as being carnivorous. The humans eventually encounter Supari, and he forms a substantial relationship with the mission, especially Anne. Supari is unveiled to be a more progressive member within the Jana Ata society, which is often extremely brutal to the Runa. But far worse things are yet to come for the Runa, who have been affected by humanity's influence. Due to the introduction of agriculture into their society, their population begins to boom. Their numbers expanded far beyond their normal constraints. This would turn out to be devastating for them. Eventually, the Runa village is attacked by the Jana Ata, and it is there that the true nature of the relationship between the Runa and the Jana Ata becomes clear. The nature of their coexistence was predatory. The Jana Ata had been breeding their prey for adaptability, intelligence, but most importantly, meat. Because the Runa had learned agriculture from the humans, their population had tipped a delicate balance previously kept in check by the predation of the Jana'ata. The Jana'ata, in response, rebalanced the scale. The ensuing brutal massacre also claimed the lives of several on the mission, as the Jana'ata forces ravaged the Runa, slaughtering inhabitants, including the infants, and obliterating the gardens. Only Mark and Emilio survived the attack on the Runa villages, rescued by the Jana'ata Supari, who transports them to his abode. Since Supari is described as a progressive member of Jana'ata society, his cruelty towards Emilio and Mark can be viewed as a testament to the standard barbarism of their society. Supari, in the custom of his people, strips the muscle from their hands in a process which would render them utterly dependent. It is a brutal and painful procedure that Mark does not survive. Supari then surrenders Emilio Sandas to his elder brother, and this is where his true suffering begins. To Kithiri, Emilio is no more than a toy, a plaything. His humanity is meaningless to this alien being, who turns out to in fact be the artist behind the music that they had received on Earth. And at the hands of Halvin Kithiri, Emilio becomes a victim of the darkest forms of abuse and degradation, a desecration of both body and spirit. Language, his life's work, and his delight, which had failed Emilio Sandas word by word, now deserted him utterly. Shuddering in violent moronic waves, he could smell the nauseating glandular reek of his own terror. Mute, he was unable to even think the word for the unspeakable, joyless rite that was coming. Not even when his arms were seized from behind, but when the powerful prehensile feet locked over his ankles and the belly settled behind him, and the probing began. He went rigid with panic and fathomless horror, understanding finally what was about to happen. The penetration, when it came, made him scream. Things became much worse after that. Perhaps 10 minutes later, he was pulled into an unfamiliar room, bleeding and sobbing. Left alone, he vomited until he was exhausted. He did not think for a long while, but only rested, eyes open in the deepening darkness. Eventually, a servant came to take him to the baths. By that time, his life was irrevocably divided into before and after. Emilio is repeatedly assaulted by the Jana'ata, and his faith in God, which had been strained for much of his life, withers into nothing. If there was a God, then he had forsaken Emilio long ago. Kept in captivity, Emilio resolves to confront his tormentors by attempting to slay his captor. In a desperate act, Emilio decides that he will assault the next Jana'ata entering his cell. But things take a terrible turn. It is not a Jana'ata that he kills. I didn't sleep for a long time. I waited for the door to open, and I thought about how I could kill someone without my hands. He was still standing, but he was no longer seeing John Kondati. So I waited, and sometimes I would fall asleep for a few minutes, I think. But it was so dark, it was hard to tell when my eyes were open. And then I could hear footsteps outside my cell, and I got up and stood in the far corner, so I could use the momentum. And the door opened, and I saw a silhouette, and it was so strange. My eyes already knew, but my body was so primed. It was like the nerves fired without my telling them to. I crashed into her so hard. I could hear the bones in her chest snap, John. He tried desperately to take the force against his ruined hands, to cushion the shock. But before he could make his arms come up, they both cannoned into the stone wall, and Askama was crushed by the impact. He found himself on the floor, supporting his weight on his knees and his forearms, with Askama crumpled beneath him, her face so close to his that he could hear her whisper. She smiled at him, blood bubbling in the corner of her mouth and seeping from a nostril. You see, Milo? Your family came for you. I found them.
Inadvertently, he attacks the Runa child he had befriended before. Askama had in fact come with members of the second expedition from Earth. In an outburst of rage against all that had happened to him, Emilio ends up taking an innocent life. Misinterpreting the situation, the official Earth party which had just arrived on Rahkat concludes that Sandoz cold-bloodedly murdered a child, deeming him a disgrace. After this, Sandoz, an utterly destroyed man, is returned to Earth, disgraced in the eyes of the world. It takes him many, many months before he is ready to recount his story. Themes and ideas. Emilio Sandoz, like so many people in the real world, believed that if he lived out his life in accordance with his understanding of the will of God, then he would be rewarded. In the words of author Mary Doria Russell, in doing so, we're making a deal that God didn't sign on to. Emilio sees his relationship with God as a bargain that God has not kept his end of the deal on. He feels that he has been seduced by God himself, betrayed and assaulted. When people go about acting as though they have the endorsement of God, terrible things can happen as a result. Emilio blames God and himself for all of the terrible things that occurred on Rahkat.
And now the garden is laid to waste, he whispered. The wives and the husbands and the children are all dead, and there is nothing left but ash and bone. Where was our protector? Where was God, your holiness? Where is God now?
The answer was immediate, certain. In the ashes, in the bones, in the souls of the dead, and in the children who live because of you. Nothing lives because of me.
You are wrong. I live, and there are others.
I am of blight. I carried death to Rahkat like syphilis, and God laughed while I was raped.
God wept for you.
You have paid a terrible price for his plan,
and God wept when he asked it of you.
Sandoz cried out and backed away, shaking his head. That is the most terrible lie of all.
God does not ask.
I gave no consent. The dead gave no consent.
God is not innocent.
The Sparrow is a science fiction novel that contains within it themes surrounding belief in a benevolent higher power in the face of all of the universe's suffering and pain. It boils down to the old philosophical discussion, the problem of evil. If God is benevolent and all-powerful, how could he allow evil and suffering to exist in his world? If he could prevent it, but chose not to, he could not be wholly good. If he was incapable of preventing it, then it would mean that he could not truly be omnipotent. There is an aspect of this series that makes me think of the Prime Directive. If you've been following my channel for a while now, then you might know that Star Trek The Next Generation is my favorite TV show of all time. In Star Trek TNG, the Federation's flagship, the Enterprise, is on an infinite mission to seek out new life on new worlds and new civilizations, but there is a major rule that the Federation follows. It is called the Prime Directive. The events on Rahkat perfectly illustrate why the Prime Directive is so important in the Star Trek universe. The Prime Directive essentially states that they are in no way allowed to interfere with civilizations below a certain degree of development. In the vast majority of cases, there are of course exceptions, and at times they do break or bend this rule, but they also do a good job of showing why it is an absolutely necessary rule to have. What I also think is interesting about this specific story is how society judges Emilio and the rest of the mission. As the book jumps back and forth between the past and the present, we learn that the public is very angry about what occurred on Rahkat, and they need someone to blame for it. And I can see why. Even though the Jesuits meant no harm, it was still reckless to visit an alien world that you know nothing about and attempt to establish contact. And it's also the fact that they didn't let the rest of the world know about it. In my opinion, first contact is something that all of humanity should share a role in. When Emilio hears this signal, the music from another race of beings in space, he is filled with a kind of divine certainty. His belief in God, which was always a bit shaky, becomes more solid at that point. He is filled with purpose because what they are doing is God's will. They don't have to worry because God will take care of it. To some, this is what faith is, and to some, this is arrogance. And when perceived arrogance leads to such devastating results, of course people are going to be outraged. It's the classic tale of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. In an attempt to share their love of God and their way of life with the Runa, they destroyed themselves and the lives of many others. The author. The author of this book was actually born into a Catholic family and later in life became an atheist. But interestingly enough, when she was writing The Sparrow, she was in the process of converting to Judaism. Russell has a PhD in biology and anthropology. Anthropology is, of course, essentially the study of all of humanity, every aspect of us from our genetic roots here on Earth to the complex social structures we manifest with great variance throughout the world. A major aspect of anthropology also relates to how we as a species develop over time. There are three distinct fields of anthropology: archaeology, sociocultural anthropology, and biological anthropology. To quote the UCSC website on anthropology, biological anthropology deals with the evolution of humans, their variability, and adaptations to environmental stresses. Using an evolutionary perspective, we examine not only the physical form of humans, the bones, the muscles, and organs, but also how it functions to allow survival and reproduction. The reason I am mentioning this is because I have no doubt that Russell made use of her knowledge of bioanthropology when creating the extraterrestrial life forms, the Runa and the Jana'ata. According to Russell herself, the idea for the Runa and the Jana'ata begin when she took a look at two species of Australopithecine, human ancestors, herbivores and carnivores. She began to wonder what it would be like if the herbivores and predators were still around and the predator species had domesticated its prey. Many have suggested that Mary Doria Russell may have been inspired by a science fiction novel from 1958 titled A Case of Conscience by American author James Blish. There are several similarities from the main character's name, which is Ruiz Sanchez in Blish's work, in comparison to Emilio Sandoz in Russell's work, to the premise of Jesuit priest sent on a mission with others to make first contact with an alien race on a planet far away. Russell apparently got asked about this comparison enough to where she had to leave a message about it on the frequently asked questions segment of her website. In the message, she denies being inspired by Blish's work, stating, "I get this question all the time because Blish's 1958 story is about a Spanish Jesuit in space. I was 8 years old when that book was published and a long way from reading science fiction. I was still reading horse books like Black Beauty and the Black Stallion. People have told me that Blish's protagonist is named Ruiz Sanchez, so they thought that I must have named Emilio Sandoz in homage to Blish. In fact, Emilio got his name from the pharmaceutical manufacturer who made my son's cold medicine. Danny had a cold in 1992, and when I started the book and I noticed the name Sandoz on the medical label, I liked the sound of it. No symbolism or homage beyond that, I'm afraid." The Sparrow has been heralded as a masterpiece by some, and in 1998 it won the coveted Arthur C. Clarke Award. Russell also released a sequel to The Sparrow in 1998 called Children of God, so I'll probably end up checking that one out as well. Conclusion. The Sparrow is truly one of the most disturbing books that I've read in recent memory. It's been a hard one to stop thinking about. It's not a book that makes you feel terribly good after you read it. In fact, it leaves a kind of bitter taste in your mouth that stays with you for a while. There is a deep sadness to this story, something bordering on pessimism, and yet it's not quite saying don't try to do good things, but instead maybe says consider the potential ways it can go wrong beforehand. Don't go in blindly and naively and expect the universe to line up behind you and bless you for your good deeds. Thanks for watching, guys. Have you read The Sparrow? What did you think of this pretty disturbing book? What are some of the other science fiction books that you'd like to see me cover on this channel? Thanks so much, guys. It is now time for Patreon questions. Now, I asked you guys if you had any questions relating to the concept of first contact. First question: has there been a story written where first contact is smooth enough that war isn't the first result? Unease and wariness, but at least a genuine effort to reach out after the initial meeting. Second, have you read the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers? I've heard it's good and I would like a seasoned opinion. Well, first off, I have not read that series, but I'll add it to my list. As far as stories where first contact is pretty smooth, I might mention something like Childhood's End, although those aliens were pretty controlling and humans didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. And then there's also Contact by Carl Sagan, which is about benevolent aliens that contact humanity. And then I also might as well throw in the Vulcans from Star Trek First Contact. It's a pretty straightforward contact when we contact the Federation, the Vulcans, and the Andorians, because they are very evolved races of beings, and they only choose to contact races of beings that have reached a certain level of development. My favorite contact story is the Andromeda Strain. Despite our proclivities about viruses, do you think that first contact with a microbial being can potentially be benevolent? So the Andromeda Strain is a book by Michael Crichton, who also wrote Jurassic Park, and I know that it has something to do with a virus that we uncover in the atmosphere, though I have not read this novel. I think the idea of uncovering benevolent microbial organisms that are extraterrestrial is interesting, and it makes me think of the concept of symbiotic organisms, organisms that somehow benefit each other. With a microbe, I feel like there's three potential ways that it can go, and that is coexistence without really affecting each other. Maybe we can just live on the same planet and coexist, and these microbes really don't affect us at all, positive or negative. The other way is, of course, it could be a virus, and it could be something that we cannot coexist with. It could be something that, infects us or causes some sort of disease in humankind, so there could be no coexistence. And then, of course, the third option is, coexistence and somehow benefiting each other. Right now, you have billions of foreign microbes living in your body, and those microbial organisms are essential to the functions of your body. So is it possible? Potentially, but ultimately I don't think you could ever be able to tell with something that is from an entirely different evolutionary tree than everything else on Earth how it would affect us. And then there's always the potential of mutation. It could be one thing in the beginning and become something that is harmful later. How would first contact fundamentally challenge existing religious beliefs? Well, I think it's going to be different for every religion and different for every religious person. Some religions don't really make room for the potential existence of extraterrestrial life. Some religions state that we are God's sole creation. We are the dominant species of the universe. We are made in the image of God. So therefore, there really couldn't be an extraterrestrial civilization that's also potentially designed in the image of God that is more advanced than us, because they would potentially be visiting us. It's all going to boil down to individual interpretation. Some people are going to think that they're potentially angels. Some people are going to think that these are potentially devils. Some people might worship the aliens themselves, because then they would be a higher power. I'm not into astrology, as I've said before, but I do think it is interesting how certain people that believe in astrology believe that we are entering into the age of Aquarius, which is the age of science and reason, and some people have said that something like alien beings or UFOs could be potentially the god of the age of Aquarius. As humans move further away from traditional religions, they look for something else that can lead mankind and keep us from going astray. How do you feel science fiction has evolved in regards to first contact? Do the old school concepts such as H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds still terrify and hold relevance with its original concepts compared to something like the modern Jeff Vandermeer novel Annihilation? Very interesting question. I'll start off by saying I think that earlier science fiction stories about first contact, like War of the Worlds, were more rooted in paranoia. You know, the idea that the Martians were watching mankind from Mars covertly, waiting for their moment to strike, and that they had this superior technology. It's a very paranoid idea. Now, I think in the 12 decades or so since War of the Worlds, and due to the knowledge that we've gained about the universe since then, I think that there is still, of course, an element of paranoia, but there's also a certain sense to a lot of modern stories about first contact that we are humbled before the universe. Because you bring up Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, the Area X trilogy, and that trilogy basically says that we don't know anything about the universe, that something could just stumble upon us, this broken biological machine from another dimension, from another world potentially far, far away, could somehow make its way to Earth and have devastating effects on the planet, and we may never be able to understand why or even comprehend why it's happening. Because the universe really is this vast, powerful thing full of all sorts of unknowns and all sorts of incredible possibilities and all sorts of incredible potential dangers that we aren't even aware of. We've learned that the complexities of the universe may be something that we can never understand. I think compared to a lot of later stories like the Sparrow, like the Annihilation trilogy, the idea of a Martian invasion seems quite simple. Is there anything humans can do to prepare for first contact? Good question, and the answer is really not much. I don't know if there's much that we can really do to prepare for first contact until we collectively come together as one human species. Now, perhaps first contact will be the driving factor that makes that happen. That's something that a lot of people tend to believe. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Also, the circumstances surrounding first contact, I think, could vary so widely that there really is no way to prepare for it. These could be aliens that drop out of another dimension. These could be aliens that were living below the surface of Mars this entire time. They could be microbes, like we mentioned earlier. So I think there's so many factors and so much variance that I don't think there's any real way to prepare unless there was somehow some way that we knew about their existence way ahead of first contact. Like, so if we had the ability to gather intelligence about the type of life forms they were and their level of technology before coexistence, and maybe we could prepare by studying them in that manner. Otherwise, I don't really know. So that is it for Patreon questions this time. If you would like to support this channel, you can click the Patreon link in the description. Thanks so much for listening, guys. If you want more Quinn's ideas, check out the podcast episode that I did with the Gum Jabbar podcast, one of the biggest Dune podcasts. We had an awesome time discussing all things Dune and making predictions for the upcoming movie. You can also check out the video that I did with Bibliotheory. We did a direct one-to-one comparison of Hyperion to Dune, two of my favorite epic sci-fi books. Check that video out as well. Thanks so much, guys.